I appreciate that. So we're going to record now. I'm going to share screen and show our agenda. Sorry, we're reacting a little slowly, but we're getting there. Okay. What's so nice about our agenda is that it keeps us informed about everything that's going on in the meeting. And then after the meeting, you'll be able to refer to that to gather your information. So we begin today with just reminding ourselves of why we're here. Just as Julia said, this is your meeting. We sent out the survey and asked you about things you were interested in talking about and learning about. And that's how we plan the agenda. And we will continue that at today's exit slip for the meeting, we'll ask you again about what resonated with you about today's meeting, and then what else would you like to know about before our next meeting. We also want to remind you that you can talk to us at any time. You don't have to wait for a survey. I just, send an email or a text or give us a phone call. We look forward to hearing from you. There is an attendance link, and that's the magic of the attendance link is when you fill all that out, then later on you'll be receiving an ELA certificate for 2 hours, because that's the length, I think, of our meeting today. So we're going to begin today with our first presenter. We're going to have some presenters, and then we're going to have breakouts and have some opportunity to discuss what we heard, and then we're going to just talk to each other as a group. So Allison Bemis, she's going to go first because she has another Zoom meeting, I think, at this very time. So she's going to go in a little late for us. She's going to join us. And I'm going to, hold on 1 second. I can take care of that. Here we go. Okay. So Allison, as you know, many of you know Allison. Allison works together with us at GREC. She's worked for many years with collaboration with the Center for Gifted Studies. And I think most of you know, she just happens to be my daughter. So I have to say that because I'll slip up and say something that lets you know that anyway. But Allison, without further ado, I'm going to let you just take over, share your screen and take over. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm just thrilled to be here and see you all this morning. When I got the email from Dr. Julia, and she asked, hey, do you have, would you be interested in sharing things about distance learning or virtual opportunities that are still out there for enrichment for kids? I am so excited to share something with you that we've been working on here in Warren County. So it's great to see your faces, and I will go ahead and start sharing my screen. See your faces or see your names. I know some of you are in office settings and you might be in multiple meetings, not be able to show your faces, but at least see your names. So I see several of you already in. I'm going to press present so that you can see it a little better. So what we're going to spend the first 20-ish minutes talking about today are enrichment opportunities for children and families in unprecedented times. So when I kept hearing unprecedented times, although I knew what the word meant, I did look up the definition because I thought, I just wonder, is that really the best word to fit right now? When because you just heard it all over the media. And so I looked it up, and it's just, very simply doing something new or something that you've never experienced before. And I think we're still in unprecedented times. And, I saw this at the end of the summer, beginning of the school year, and it's really short, but I have to share it with you because it's sort of about why I started to create these.
The way that we were so close to precedented times. So close.
And I want to share that with you because I really felt like, and I think that a lot of you, hang on, he likes to say it twice because it's important, but I'm sure that a lot of you felt that this summer. We sort of went back to the end of the school year. We had hope on the horizon. Folks were being vaccinated. At that time, they were saying children would be vaccinated maybe around the start of the school year. Numbers went down. Many of us went on vacation. We had summer camps for kids again, put people together, started seeing mask requirements lift, and we felt like, oh my gosh, we're finally at the end of this thing. And then you know what happened in September? Their numbers started going up again. And so we realized, you know what, we're not quite to precedented times yet, but there is still hope on the horizon. So I want to bring this up to you because you may think, a matter of fact, many districts now are no longer offering virtual opportunities for their children. I can say my son's district, I have one son that's back in school, typically, you know, every day of the week. But my younger son, if you've never worked with me before, he had a stroke before he was born. And so that's resulted in right-sided hemiplegia, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, and autism. So if he were to get this illness, he would be at a greater risk due to his seizure disorder for additional complications, and also due to the stroke and the paralysis on one side. So what that meant for my family is he's not old enough to be vaccinated yet, and there is no virtual option. And our numbers started going back up. So we made the decision alongside with his neurologist to go ahead and homeschool him for this year until he can be vaccinated, because that was the best choice for him. In that meantime, when we thought that our numbers were getting better and things, I decided to start also, I work for GREC, but I also do story times at our library. This is something I've done since I worked with Dr. Julia and Dr. Mary Evans and Dr. Tyler Clark. That's the first time I've gotten to use your doctor name. Put that in front. I'm so proud of you. But we noticed that our numbers were dropping off. And the reason why is because we know that our younger children, the children that I was working with in Storytime, are not yet able to be vaccinated. And so a lot of families were not yet comfortable bringing their children into a Storytime atmosphere. As the parent of a high-risk child and a child that's not old enough to be vaccinated, that certainly hit home with me. So when we were discussing this problem, we were thinking, okay, but there are ways. Some of the parents were kind of burnt out on only virtual experiences, right? They were burnt out on having their kids just in front of the screen. And I totally get that. So we started brainstorming other things that we could do that might be sort of a hybrid experience. So that went to, how do we offer these experiences for young children through a combination of distance and virtual environments? So we took the best part of virtual instruction and the best part of distance instruction and tried to merge them together into an enrichment opportunity. Now, what I'm going to share with you today is about a family literacy model, because I have created these in partnership with our Warren County Public Library. At the end of this, I'm going to tell you about a couple of things I would do differently if I were just creating these as the GT resource teacher or as the district person, okay? How I might tweak it a little bit. What we decided to create for families were grab and go enrichment opportunities, okay? So these are opportunities for enrichment that we think families may not be able to have access to or feel comfortable doing right now, either in the library as after school events where they used to go into schools and partner with schools and offer those for families, or as things families might have just done on their own to enrich children. We want to help them bring some of those families into the home. Our overall parameters that we had to keep in mind for this project were it had to be something we could offer for free to the families. We wanted, doing this through the library, it was important to us that it was equal opportunity for everyone that might be interested, but we did not have a budget that was very large for these. So they had to be very inexpensive to create. They needed to be relatable and engaging, okay? It needed to be relatable to the students' interest, to what was going on in their world, and also engaging, or they won't do them, okay? They'll just sit there and be a waste. We wanted to have community partnerships for this. That can help with funding, or that can just help bring awareness to different things that are available. It can also help you reach more students. And we wanted this to be connected. Importantly, we wanted this to not be an isolated experience. Many distance learning things that we offered initially were isolated experiences, and we want this to be interconnected. So here's an example of the first kit. The first one will release this weekend is their goal. They will go out. Warren County Library has branches all over our county, and so they'll go out in Smiths Grove, and they'll go out at the Kirby, and they'll go out at Maine, probably some at Graham. So their goal is to reach the whole county. Here's an example of one. You're going to see they're all very different, and I'll talk about why in just a minute. The first one is they're creating their very own hot potato. And so we've got a little bit of engineering in there. They have to design their hot potato. These are for young learners and their families. And then I give them 2 ways that they can play hot potato. I'll share that in a minute. At the bottom, they have a virtual field trip to Cheney's Dairy Barn. And they also get a plastic glove so they can practice milking and udder. Okay. So basically, I took all of the experiences that I did in my farm themed story time, all of those content experiences that I brought into that theme, and I made them as a to-go kit for families. So here's an example of actually my little guy and Mama and Papa playing rhyming hot potato. So the literacy skill that they're working on there is creating rhymes and nonsensical rhymes and phonological awareness. So I will say each one of these kits that I've created are created to a hands-on literacy or a hands-on STEAM component. So these 2 show examples of hands-on STEAM. So the sunflower will go out in October. They're going to analyze the work of Van Gogh and look at his sunflowers. And then they have all the materials they need to create their very own sunflower inspired by Van Gogh. It also has a mindfulness component. On another side of STEAM, for the not so scary one, they are going to be exploring static electricity. So you'll see so far we've had a farm theme one where they take a field trip and they're playing a hands-on literacy game. And then now we have a science theme, and we also have an art theme. Okay, so I am varying the content to match different interests throughout our community. Also, because we know if we're speaking about this through a GT lens, we're looking at talent development, and we're looking at building interest and experiences for children. When children are young and they're not yet old enough to be identified, and we don't know about how much schema and opportunity that they've had, what we're trying to do right now is layer all of those opportunities so that they can find their passions and find what they're curious about. And we want to give them not just opportunities to do science and math, or not just literacy. We want to cast that wide net and help them grow and let their families see them interact in these different content areas. My goal for these were all to be low or no tech. One reason is because they went out at the public library, and that's different than when you're working at your school. At your school, you can make sure everyone has Chromebooks. When you're working with the public library, you can't necessarily make sure everyone has access to technology. But the other reason is because our children are already spending a lot of time in front of screens, and I just really wanted to encourage the hands-on component away from screens. Unless it was just like a lesson hook or a story. That QR code does work. If you want to scan it, all you do is open your picture scanner on your phone and you can see that one. That's one of the ones I used in a Spookly the Square Pumpkin. That's a great reading. I think it was maybe the person who plays Dracula read Spookly the Square Pumpkin, and it fit with one of our October themes. So they're going to enjoy that story time there together with their families. And then it has a gross motor game that they actually just create and make themselves for bowling at home. Because again, we're having gross motor in there, we're having literacy in there, we're working, on all of the areas of child development because we're working with young children. Another example here is in the fall colors one that you'll see on the right. That is to a reading of Dance Like a Leaf. Dance Like a Leaf deals with grief, and a child grew up dancing with her grandmother. Her grandmother then develops dementia and passes, and the child, as she grows, learns to continue enjoy dancing. But the QR code for that one is actually for a reading in Spanish. So we're bringing different languages in there too. It's not only for Spanish speaking children. My boys, when they were young, I used to take them to Spanish story times. I think it's great to allow children to listen to different languages and notice some sounds you hear that are the same and sounds you hear that are different. Great phonological awareness opportunity. There is an investigation for that one in chromatography too, so you can see it has hands-on STEAM. Another component you've heard me mention a few times is that not only are these hands-on, this is something that I used to hear Dr. Julia say all the time, it's far better for it to be minds-on too, so we've expanded in that. And they are all minds-on, there are thinking strategies with each one, but also there are mindfulness strategies and SEL connection. This goes back to what we talked about. These activities are not for the children to do in isolation. They're not busy bags, okay? Busy bags are different, and there's a time and a place for a busy bag, but these are really a family literacy kit. So it is made for either families to explore together, or if a child has a pod, like a neighborhood pod of friends, then it could be for kids to explore together, but they are set up in a way to remove the isolation component, because any child or family that is still needing to be in isolation, at this point really has been doing this for over a year now. So I wanted to be very mindful that we are including the isolation is not a part of it. Okay. So mindfulness, movement, and togetherness. Okay. And there are thinking strategies in each one. And here is an example of that one. This one has yoga cards with it, and the kids are going out and doing a nighttime walk with their families, being a zoologist and looking for the animals that they can find together, or insects that they find together that come out at nighttime. Last night, my husband and my son did this, not as a part of this activity, but they found a toad, and it brought great joy. The other component that was intentionally put into these, and if we've worked together before, you know that this is very important to me, is that it's going to have examples of twice exceptional folks. And then the example of this one is Vasily Kandinsky, and it's also going to have UDL task, because just like I mentioned earlier, these are for young children. If we're thinking primary talent pool age children, okay? And we want to cast that wide net. One reason they're UDL task is because these are for families or pods of children. And they may be working together with children that need a different entry point, a different level, or at a different level of readiness. It needs to be accessible to everyone. Another reason is because we don't know all of that child's strengths yet. And the beautiful thing about a UDL task that removes the ceiling is the kids can take it as high as they want to, as they're interested, as their curiosity allows. And often they'll take it much higher than we ever anticipated, as I know you know well. So here's an example of that. This is actually, I think, the last kit that they're going to give out this in 2021. And it's based on Vasily Kandinsky. And they're going to look at a piece of his artwork, which is there in the frame. And we're lucky in our library, we have the book, The Noisy Paintbrush. That's the other thing the kits do, is they tell resources that the families can check out from the library to support this. If you have not read The Noisy Paint Box, you should definitely take a look at that. It's a wonderful book for our twice exceptional learners, or even children who are not twice exceptional, to learn about that. And then I have, because they're creating abstract art, in Warren County, we have the Downing Museum, which has fantastic abstract art. It would be easy for children to compare and contrast that artwork to Vasily Kandinsky's. They also will get a canvas and have the instructions for how to make tape art with different shapes, which, as you know, is not only art, but it connects to geometry, because you're learning about lines and shape. And so it gives the fun-free family field trip idea. So what is this? If I were creating any type of take-home kit, hybrid virtual / distance experience for families, it's going to have to be universal design. Okay. It needs to be a mix of no or low tech. It needs to have varied content and varied strategies. So you need to have movement in there. You need to have play-based learning in there. You need to have all the components of STEM at some point. And it needs to not, I won't say what it's not. I'll say it needs to be done together as a family literacy connection, or with pods in a neighborhood setting, or a community-based setting. So if I were doing these at some of our housing complexes or apartment complexes here in town, then I would expect that those kids could work on those together, because they're likely in a pod playing together. Okay. What it's not, Marzano says that, my mom always says that, Marzano says we need to also know what it's not. So let me be clear about this. It is not a worksheet. Okay. It is not a task for kids to do in isolation. It is not something to just check off as, oh yeah, I sent that packet home and we've served them on their primary talent pool. It is not any of those things. It is a meaningful experience. Okay. So how would I adapt this if I were to create these for your districts? If I were to create these for your districts, then I would have a better understanding of the students that I'm serving. Right now, I'm serving a broad spectrum of students across Warren County. Okay, I didn't have any particulars on students. But if I were doing this at my school or my district level, I would have particulars on students. So I would align these tasks to match student needs and interest. For example, if I had a child, and I don't have this book right here. If I had a child that was twice exceptional that loved science, then I would bring this book into it. Okay. And I would make sure we did activities around science and aeronautical engineering based on Timble Grandin. Okay. The other thing that I would do is I would create some kind of platform for students to share back to remove that isolation and make it more interconnected. I would probably use a Flipgrid with young students because they love to film and they love to record and talk to each other about the task and what they've done. This would give them a similar experience to what they would do on a family night or a pull-out program. The other thing that I would definitely do if I were in a class of kids or doing this at the school or district level is I would allow students and have them help or families help record the content for the QR codes. So rather than just finding, the Spookly Square Pumpkin reading that was done by an actor that played Dracula, I might have my second grade children record that reading or do a reader's theater and put that on YouTube and send that out as a part of it. Okay, they would be a part of developing that content. The other thing that I would do is I would connect it to school themes or district themes. For example, if you are having an innovation focus for this year, or if you have a leadership focus for this year, then I would make some of those kits align to the themes that are already present and meaningful to your children in their lives. Or if your community, like I'm thinking if Hodgenville has Lincoln Days, then I would certainly have a kit around Lincoln Days. I would make it match my community, like how I had Baker Art Museum that they could go to for free and compare the artwork to Vasily Kandinsky. I would look at my regional area and what opportunities do I have for children there that I want to encourage families to take part in, as well as things we might be doing for this school. There is my email address. It's allison.bemis@grec.org. On Twitter, you can connect with me at Teacher Allison. If you have any questions or you would like me to share any of this with you, I would be very happy to do so. But thank you so much for sharing your time with me this morning. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Allison. We appreciate that so much. And Allison's going to be jumping into another meeting. And so this is the time, if anyone has any comments, you could put it in the chat box, or you can just unmute yourself and ask or respond.
Allison, I love the ideas that you've shared. I think they spark thoughts on how we could do that in classrooms or in schools at various levels. And I especially like the fact that you're looking for low or no tech for some of the kids. I think that some opportunities to really be low tech are great as we're trying to connect with each other. Thank you so much.
Yes, and
Thank
Allison, you'll see a lot of comments in chat. So be sure and look at the chat before you leave if you have a second to do that, because they've given you a lot of feedback there.
Oh, thank you for your kind comments. I'm glad that was useful to you. You know, it was something I hadn't really thought about until I started creating these kits, but I'm really excited to see how our community responds to them. And thank you, Dr. Julia, for the nice words. I'm glad that this was meaningful to you all. It was helpful to me, and I think it will be helpful to the library and to the children and families that we surface there. I again, my email is in there in the PowerPoint, and or I still say PowerPoint in the Google Slides, and Twitter. If you can message me there, and I'll be happy to connect with you either way. But I am going to jump off for this next meeting. But it was great to see all of you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for all the nice comments. I'm just reading them.
Yes, we all need those comments, don't we? They give us energy. That's one thing about you working from home. You don't get as much of that energy from other people. So that's important for all of us. So now let's see. We have Dr. Tyler. We're so happy to use his title now, and or we have Dr. Mary. We can and we have Kathy. So let's see about who wants to go first. To
I think
share.
Kathy wants to go first. She
Okay.
asked to be early on. So I think Kathy Anderson from KDE will be next.
Thank
Good morning,
you.
everybody.
Thank you, Kathy. I know you have a lot on your agenda today too. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always great to see everybody. And Ms. Bemis, those were wonderful suggestions. I really appreciate the fact that twice exceptional children were mentioned, and there were strategies and activities for those students, because we definitely need to have thoughts about those students as well. So I'll just quickly share my screen here, if that's all right with you guys, and get started if I can figure out how to do this. We mostly use Teams at my work, and so just give me a second to switch gears here. All right, can everybody see my screen okay? All right. So as Ms. Bemis was talking about earlier, this has been a really challenging year to get started again. And this is one of my favorite quotes. It's supposed to be hard. If it was easy, everyone would do it. And so, when we go into teaching, I don't think that we realize maybe how hard it's going to be. I know my first year of teaching, I was like, wow, the learning curve was very steep that first year. And so if this is your first or second year in Gifted and Talented, I know that you have probably learned a whole lot, especially if you started last year with COVID. So just thanks to all the hard work that you guys are doing to make sure that students are continuing to receive services in our different areas, and that our teachers are being supported by resources and strategies. Thank you so much for everything that you do every day. It is very much appreciated from KDE, and I'm sure also from the districts that you serve. So here's today's topics, and I neglected to put one of them in there. I'm going to talk about the Advisory Council, give a quick update about that. So just really quickly, the state report card was released yesterday, and one of the reasons that Gifted and Talented information is in this report card is because of the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA. In ESSA, districts, states have to report the levels of achievement for their high achieving students, as well as their other students as well. But that was one of the new components of ESSA, was that advanced level students' achievement has to be reported. So our information is in the student report card. That's one of the reasons it's there. So there is the academic performance there, also ACT subject area scores for the Kentucky Public Schools of juniors was released yesterday. 2021 four-year graduation rate, which is desegregated by student groups, is in there. There's an opportunity to learn survey that you guys should check out that had some really interesting information about COVID and how students responded to COVID last year. And also in the new SRC are participation rates from different groups. There are lots of data sets. These data sets go back to 2012. I mean, there's an incredible amount of data for Gifted and Talented. In case you didn't have enough time, enough to do already, there's lots of data to look at. And then there's some also interesting information about transition to adult life. So where are students after graduation? There's information about, did they go to college? Did they go to career? Did they go into the service? Those types of things. So lots of good information in the state report card. Just a quick update about the State Advisory Council. I'm really excited. We almost have a full council. We have 16 members now. So yay, Dr. Julia, right? We are set to meet November the 17th, and we will be sending out some information to those members very soon. The new members there are with an asterisk, and then our members who continue to serve or who've been reappointed do not have an asterisk. So as you can see, we're about to get a full council so that we can move full steam forward in giving guidance and advice from the council to the department. So I'm very excited about that. We still need a superintendent and a high school principal. So if you know of someone who would make a great candidate for that and you'd like to reach out to them, there's the information there. You just go to, you can just type in any browser that you want, search engine, Kentucky Boards and Commissions, and up it will pop and you'll see application there. Or if you want to reach out to someone there at the governor's office, it would be Lindsay Bloom and her information is there. So I'll pop that in the chat over here in a second so that you guys can have that if you need it. So just a couple of reminders about some things. As I kind of look back from some evaluation and also from monitoring, a lot of data is gathered from that time, and just want to remind you guys to be looking at your policies and procedures. Make sure that you've got policies and procedures for all of the gifted regulations. Gifted regulation, wherever you see the word procedure in the regulation, make sure you've got a procedure for that. So a procedure is a directions for how the policy will be carried out. Usually you'll see steps, you'll see people who are responsible mentioned in there, and usually like a time frame. Whereas policies is more kind of a overarching idea about, you know, what should be done. Like you might see something that says the superintendent will ensure that there are identification measures for all the categories. Whereas for a procedure, you would see, you know, gifted, you'd see general intellectual ability, and it would say, you know, number one, in the spring, the GT coordinator will reach out to the GT selection and placement committee. Number two, blah, 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 blah. Number three, you know, those types of things. So make sure you've got procedures that explain how different things will be carried out for the necessary items in the regulation. All right, so these are some procedures that are often most missing that I could see from monitoring last season. So screening and diagnosing of students, oftentimes people have a procedure that they are carrying out. It's just not articulated or written down in their policies and procedures. And don't forget, these have to be locally board approved and then posted for, you know, where they're available for all stakeholders to see. And a good place to do that is on your GT website. Another procedure that's left out usually is permission to test. So if you're going to individually test a student, you have to have a procedure for that. A lot of people have a form, but they don't have anything written down about how that's carried out, how it's implemented. Parent input for services. Again, oftentimes people have a form, they have a procedure that they're carrying out, it's just not articulated. And then the annual program evaluation. This is something that's coming along that more people are implementing. It seems like about probably 4 or 5 years ago, people were like, what? An annual program evaluation? What the heck is that? But I think people know more about that and people are starting to implement it, especially maybe the stakeholder survey part of the feedback on the program part. Just important to have procedures for how the different parts of that data are going to be collected. Some of the data that you don't often see that's being collected is like cost effectiveness. And then sometimes people don't realize that in their policies and procedures that the data that's collected has to be shared with their SBDM councils and their local school board. So look in your policies and procedures and see, you know, is that something that's in our policies that we're supposed to be sharing the data that's collected for the annual program evaluation. And I would just say this is a great opportunity, if that's in your policies and procedures, to share with your SBDM councils and your local school board, to share all the great work that you were doing with the program, to talk about the community involvement that's going on with your program, to talk about the awesome services that you guys are offering your kids, and also an opportunity if perhaps you maybe need another staff person to ensure services are being provided to students, to say, hey, this is the money that we're getting from the state. This is the money that we're able to get from the district, but we really could, if you look at our caseload, we've got 200 or 300 people on our caseload. We really could use some extra help here. So just opportunity, I think, to, like I said before, share the great things you're doing, and then also talk about the needs the program might have. Don't forget, this is a great time, especially if you're new, to look at the GT data standards. Make sure you're entering those records correctly, especially the year identified. When I go in to help people with things on record, sometimes I look at the year identified and I'm like, oh, that's not correct. So just remember, if you identify students this year, it'll automatically come up and put 2021, but actually the year identified is always the last part of the school year, so it would be 2022. So just go back in and review those data standards. And also, we were having some concerns about transfer of GT records. Make sure you know the difference between the transfer of the GT record and the transfer of the GT documents. Also, missing records. So that's a heavy lift for me. I get a weekly report, but I can't unfortunately send out 70 or 80 emails every week. So just make sure that, if I send you an email, that you're following up on that. Or if you want, you can run the data validation reports yourself between local and state, and you can find the discrepancies between those two reports. If you want to know more about that, just send me an email. I think you can find how to run those reports in our end of year slide presentation from last year. I think it starts on slide 67. So please be mindful of making sure that you are serving all those students by not missing any students who transfer to your district. Just want to talk a little bit about data and equity. Equity is a really big focus in the state, and we want to make sure that our program is serving all students that we can possibly serve, that we're not missing any students because of maybe our policies or procedures, or just maybe we're not implementing our procedures or whatever. And so a good way to kind of look at your data is to look at the QA, which I think stands for quality assurance, gifted and talented report. And so the path for that is typed up there. It's index, KY state reporting, KDE report, and I've given, and so, what does the data say to you? It helps you look at, populations that might not be represented. It helps you look at, what categories maybe you don't have any students that are identified. It helps you look at disproportionality, because it gives you information between your GT data and total enrollment. And then, some things that you can do after you look at your data is just, review your procedures, look at the assessments that you're using, and discuss it with your supervisors and your GT committee. So I'll just give you a quick glance at what the state report looks at, what it looks like right now, or it did about the middle of September. So as you can see, it's got a gifted and talented column. It's got a total enrollment column. It gives the information by gender, by race and ethnicity, by other student accountability groups, by other student subgroups. And then this is kind of a way to look at the data a little bit differently. Just put it in a bar graph. And as you can see, there are a few discrepancies. Some of them are more than others. Our 2 or more races is pretty equal across the state. Then in our other accountability groups, as you can see, we have a large number of free and reduced lunch students. That's the orange bar here in our state. And there's a wide discrepancy in our GT program between free and reduced lunch and total enrollment. And then our English learners, there's pretty big discrepancy there. This is the third page. The third page gives you, or second page gives you some more information about just the category counts. And so you've got an unduplicated count. We've got about 71,708 students. And then over on the far right, we've got about 14,893 primary talent pool students. And then it breaks down those groups or those students within, the various categories there, and also breaks it down by the other groups that were on page 1. And then there's one more page there, sorry, moving on, that breaks it down by grade level. And so this lets you know which students are in what categories by grade level. And you might get concerned when you see the zeros here, but that's primary talent pool. And so we don't desegregate that information by category. But if you want to get, your formal identified number of students, of course, you would have to take your primary talent pool number and subtract that from the unduplicated count to get your formal identified numbers there. And so I ought to be clicking as I talk so you can see things. In 4th and 5th grade, you'll notice that the numbers, especially from 5th to 4th grade, went down considerably. And I would theorize that's probably because of COVID last year, and it was making it very hard for people to try to identify students. But hopefully, just depends, I guess, on how COVID goes, but we'll see those numbers come back to where they were, a couple of years ago. So the last thing I want to say is just document, document, document. So like I said, there's a lot of data that's gathered from monitoring. And one of the things that came through loud and clear was that we need to continue to document, especially when we have our students that we identify. You've got to collect that evidence. It's got to go into a folder. Please look at the mandated category evidence that's in section 3 of the regulation. The regulation can be very broad in some of the other sections, but it's very specific for the 5 categories and for primary talent pool. So make sure that you are collecting the appropriate evidence for those students. Make sure that whatever is selected in Infinite Campus is reflected in the folders. Don't forget that as your GT selection placement committees meet to review the folder of the identification evidence of these students, that you are documenting that you're having these meetings, that you're also talking about special considerations, that equity, because that's one of the big parts of equity in our regulation, is the special considerations component. Also, I think professional development is getting better across our state for districts according to looking at the data from monitoring from last year. But just don't forget that when professional development is offered to those staff who work with our gifted and talented students, that you let them know who their students are and that they need to have professional development. And this is when it will be offered. And please keep a list of those people who are offering professional development and documenting who has taken advantage of that, sign-in sheets, those types of things. That's really important. So I know I have thrown a lot of information out there to you guys, and I think I've seen a couple of questions come up. So I can't see that from my screen. I'll stop sharing here though, and then maybe I can see you guys a little bit better. So any questions or thoughts or comments that anybody has? Feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. All right, I guess we're good, Jamie. So
Kathy, thank
Can
you.
I ask a quick question? And maybe
Sure.
it's not a quick question.
Sure.
I think on my mind and a lot of folks' minds is local norms. Where would you recommend that they go for local norms, and what policies and procedures they should have in place for identifying students using local norms in Kentucky?
Well, the WKU Javits website has a really good brochure that talks about how local norms should be used. Also, Scott Peters and Marcia Gentry have some really good information. Maybe I can find that information and put it in the the chat. We had a local norms guidance document, and we took it down because it had some language that needed to be tweaked, and I have meant to try to get to that to tweak some of that language so it's more culturally sensitive. But I would say overall, as you listen to the experts in that field, that local norms, you would start at your district level, but unfortunately, sometimes you don't really see a difference in who your students might be. So as you look at that Javits brochure about local norms, it talks about that you might want to look at your building norms. And we also have a calculator that Tyler, I know that you and Jen Sheffield helped put together. So you can use that calculator to put in the scores for your students. Say you've got a GIA screener that you've used, and you maybe didn't find very many students in your district. And maybe you've got 3 elementary schools. You might start at elementary school A and put in those scores from, the COGAT or the LSAT or whatever your district used. And you want to have as large a group as possible, but put in the scores of the students that you used. And the cut scores are going to be different, but you're still looking for that 9 stay 9. So you're still going to see, who the high flyers are in your district, right? And then you've got that score. Then you also still need to gather the other evidences. You don't just look at that one data point, because you want to look at the whole child, correct? So you're going to be looking at, it might be checklist of behaviors that you gather from your teachers or other staff. It might be anecdotal observations that you collect from staff, or you yourself might go into the classroom and over several weeks' time, take records on that student. You can collect other information, of course, portfolios of work, teacher recommendations. So the data point is just one thing to be looking at. You want to be looking at multiple sources of criteria for students. So is that helpful? Did I answer your question?
Yes, I asked a very broad question and you answered it well.
Okay. But I'll try to find that link and put that in the chat there too in just a second. But it's a really good brochure, and I think that it would be really helpful. I think sometimes people feel like local norms are kind of vague, but really what it is you're comparing apples to apples. So you're looking at the students in your school, and you're trying to find who are those bright students who might need different types of services to help them stay engaged and to be more successful, to move further along.
Kathy,
Yeah.
my question is related to what we're talking about, but I'm addressing it to everyone who's here. Do you have a written policy on local norms at your school or your district? And if you do, would you please send it my way? We're looking for written policy on universal screening and on local norms.
And I was able to see a couple of those last year, but like I said, it is a need. It seems like people are doing it, but they don't have it written down. And so it's like technical writing. You just start from the beginning and you say, in the spring or in the fall, or in the spring and the fall, and then most people work with their schools to develop a schedule. You have to have a time to test. So that's one of the first things you'll see. Dr. Roberts, I'll try to remember to write myself a note here and send you maybe one of the ones I saw. I didn't see very many last year. Not that people weren't doing it, it's just not written down. And so heaven forbid something were to happen to one of you guys out there, or you took another job, the person that comes after you, they don't know what you did unless it's written down. So please write it down for that next person. Please help them out. Don't make them start from scratch.
And you're so right, Kathy. Policy puts best practice into writing so that it is carried on. And if you've got that approved by your district school board, it's better. But if it's approved by your site-based decision-making team, that's good too. But if you've got it written down and approved, it is far better.
Right. And don't feel like you have to put like the specific assessments or anything like that. You can just say, we will be using a general intellectual ability assessment, but it is important to have the time and how you're going to go about scheduling those students and who you meet with and those types of things. Whether or
Kathy,
not you, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm curious about something that I don't know about, and that is on the KSBA website. I know a lot of school districts look to KSBA for sample policies for the board. Do they have this type of policy in a sample form?
They have policies, Jamie, but they don't have procedures.
Okay.
I think they would like to think they're procedures, but when you look at them, you don't see step-by-step directions that help you know how to go about doing something. It might just say, we're going to screen all of our students using a general intellectual ability assessment. And that's it.
I wonder if there might be a role for, I don't know, for us or for someone to maybe submit to KSBA and maybe also to the Kentucky Association for School Council some sample policies, because especially for people that are new principals or new or new superintendents, they look to those boards, those agencies to help them out. I don't know if we could have a role in sending something that they might post or not. If that's our role, or maybe it's the advisory council's role, but it is something that maybe would, if I know just like you're saying, if you start with something, it's so much easier than starting from scratch. And so that's why those samples, people love to see a sample.
Right. And I did meet with KSBA last spring and we talked about getting together. I think that's really the role of KDE, is to provide those
Okay.
sample procedures. They've got policies. They've got great policies. They do. But there aren't very many procedures. One of the policies and procedures you'll see is for grievance, those grievance safeguards for appeals and for concerns of services. And you'll see it's got like 1 through 10. Do this, then do that. Then this person will do this, then that person will do that. But when you look at like screening and diagnostic identification, it's very broad, very broad. So
in the chat, Rowena has shared that she worked on some local norms last year with scores. And she has a question there, if you don't mind to look at that.
So Rowena says, I fixed local norms from last year's 4th grade MAP scores using all the MAP scores in our elementary schools. Can I use those percentiles for this year's 4th grade students, or will I need to fix another list from this year's schools? So Rowena, I think, oh me. So you're looking at last year's. So you didn't, so are you saying that?
Kathy, I think that she said she calculated local norms for her school last year. Does she need to recalculate those local norms in order to identify the students this year?
So she didn't, so Rowena, you didn't identify any students based on your data from last year. Is that what you're saying? You might have to unmute yourself, or because that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking if you didn't identify anybody last year, those students have now grown and they've learned more in the school year. I think, and y'all can weigh in on this with somebody who has more knowledge than I do. I think you would need to, those students would need to be assessed again using fall data. What do y'all think about that? I see some people nodding their heads. They've grown again, so I think you're going to need to take the test scores from fall MAP and then put them into the calculator. I'm sorry, I know that's a lot of work. And you can also ask, your testing company to help you with that. Most of the time it'll just be district data, And unfortunately, I don't know if the testing companies, y'all can tell me if you know, if you can ask them to do building data, because that's really where you're going to find, your students who are the high flyers in your buildings. So.
Yeah. I hope, am I unmuted now?
Yes, you are. Yes.
Okay. I was going to say I did identify some students last year with the local norms. I wasn't sure for this year's fourth grade if I had a student that on the map percentiles was really close and on the local norms would be 96 or higher, if I could use that data. But you said you think I need to go ahead and do it again for this year.
Right. You can't just pull one student out. You've got to look at the whole group.
Okay.
So yeah, I would look at your fall map scores and see, what students, are who they are using the local norms
And
that way.
I was afraid it might be a little imperfect because some students that were virtual didn't actually come in and do the map testing, but I think they had
Right. And then don't forget about special considerations. Rowena, if you've got a student who, from other data, from teacher recommendations or checklists of behavior or observations that teachers have submitted, they say this is a student who's very passionate about X, or I can see from, the questions they ask about X, that this is a student who is really, a critical thinking student, those types of things, or, or if it's a subject area like you would use for math, then don't be afraid when you meet with your GT selection committee to talk about that student, because that student may have some sort of disabling condition that might be, affecting, their scores or whatever, right? Because they might be a student that comes from a disadvantaged background of some kind, or they might be a special education student, or they might be a underachieving student,
Right.
It's very broad. That's why it's good to have that selection and placement committee that talks about the other things that you're seeing for that student, and you're looking at that other data besides just those test scores.
Yeah, and we did have some teachers that were concerned about this year's fifth graders were in the third grade when the pandemic hit and we closed down, and some of them were concerned that loss of opportunity affected them, even some that were not really disadvantaged, but had always been climbing uphill and doing really well, and then did above average, but not as high as they had been doing before that hit.
Well, I think you just have to be careful about that, Rowena, just because,
Right.
I don't know how to say this. We, as school districts, would hope that people were still meeting the needs of students. I guess that's all I'll say.
Right.
Thank you for speaking up, though. I know that can be hard to do.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks for all your
have a quick
questions. And
question.
again, oh, Sulise, did you have a
I
question?
do, and I'm going to apologize.
Okay.
I stepped away from my desk and I heard the middle and the end here, some local norms. I just want to verify. I have never been able to use local norms because our grade levels are like 70 students and less. So is that still, I know we had, even when we had that meeting in Lexington, now it's probably been 5 or 6 years ago, and we talked about local norms. We were saying a group of 100 or more. And I just wanted to verify that that was still correct. I have used it some, especially with like the Iowa, where they will show me the local norms just to see students who are performing at a higher level, but I just wanted to check about identification just to be sure.
Well, I know Tyler and I have talked about this at length. And it's best to have at least 100 students. That's what Marcia Gentry says, and in her information about things. But sometimes we know that schools don't have 100. So Tyler, what do you think?
I think that you should try running your local norms and look and see which students are rising to the top with those local norms, and then use other evidence that you have, because it's all about finding the talent in your schools. It's not about finding the statistical perfection of local norms. It's about the students. So I would say the more you have, the better. But if you don't have 100, don't shy away from using those local norms, because that's just a disservice for the students themselves.
I would concur with that. I think it is best to have as many as you possibly can, but don't just look at that one data point, you know, because you and I both know as children go on up through middle and high school, staff will push back on people that have been identified at times, and they'll say, I just don't see why in the world you ever selected that child. So that's why looking at the whole child is so important, gathering multiple data points about that kiddo.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hey, Renee.
Okay. Hey. So a follow-up question on that, because our district has the same issue that we are a very small independent school district. And so we, you know, in any given subgroup, we might only have 5 or 6 kids fall in that as opposed to 100 within a grade, within a particular grade. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly, because what we're looking at is going to using scales and other forms of evidence other than the local norms. But like Tyler recommended, still look at the local norms to see if you have a standout student in those subgroups. But when we enter on Infinite Campus, evidences that were used, am I understanding that maybe don't use that local norm? We're kind of using local norms to look for standouts and then looking for additional evidence to support it, but that local norm shouldn't be used as one of those pieces because our numbers are so low. Is that correct? Like, I guess I'm asking, can local norms still be used?
I think local norms could still be used, or special considerations, Renee.
Okay.
You know, if you're looking at that kid and they were standing out, you know, it's one of those, I can't even, you know, that student was way above, you know, other people in the school, or you had several, that would help you, I think, to see who bubbled to the top. But then you've got to collect that other evidence from their teachers and from other staff about that student, and other, you know, take the time to do some observations, take the time to have people use those jot down forms. You know, don't just hand them the form and go, here's the jot down form, please, you know, look for students or whatever, you know, to put on this form or whatever. Even if they do put those students' names on those forms, you know, let it be several weeks, not just a day or two. You know, make sure you collect that other evidence about that student. I hope I'm making sense.
Yes. So you're saying we can, of course, we would look for a lot of additional evidence to support that. We're developing a plan for that. But from what you're saying is we can also mark local norms, even though it was a small subgroup we got those norms from.
Right. You could. I think you could either use, and then you might look and see if the student, if special considerations would apply to the student. Did they come from a, you know, a disadvantaged economic background? Are they a special ed student? I mean, look at the whole student and have your people in your group and your committee talk about the student. They're the people that know. That's why it's so important that the GT coordinator or the GT teacher is not the person who is selecting. You know, that's not regulation. That's not the policy. That's not the regulation.
Yeah,
and not that you would do that, Renee. I'm not saying that.
Right. And actually, it's our special considerations groups that we are trying to utilize these local norms for, to ensure we're not overlooking any. So, okay, thank you so much.
Right, but just be, just really collect that evidence. Have a strong body of evidence for students. all students, because when as the students move up, sometimes that gets challenged by other staff. If you were monitored or whatever, that's going to be looked at, but yeah. Any other questions? Comments? All right. Thank you guys. I really appreciate it. Thanks for letting me talk. Thanks for the questions. I know that you guys don't want to overlook any students. I think that's really important. And I think as we look at our data, we know that we need to be looking at students who come from other groups. It's important.
Thank you, Kathy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you for keeping that spirit of service to the students in the utmost. That's where our hearts are. Thank you, Kathy. So let me check in with the group, and let's see if we need a quick 5-minute break before we move on, or would you prefer to go ahead? If you could just put in the chat if you want to keep moving, or if you prefer just a quick 5-minute break. We want to be sure and meet your needs. We'll watch the chat box for a second. Okay.
Jamie, I just wanted to say I signed on late. I apologize for that. I had 3 other meetings this morning, but I was just going through the presentations that were in the agenda link, and they are wonderful. Thank you. I've already sent them out to a couple of teachers.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, Amanda.
First people. So thank you for those presentations.
Okay. Thank you, Amanda.
And I apologize for signing on late.
We understand. We know there are a lot of meetings this morning, so thank you. So I'm saying keep moving. So we have Tyler or Mary. Which of you would like to go first?
And Tyler, I think you're on the agenda next.
Okay.
I think so. Let's see. Can you all see my screen here? All right. And Joya, I'm not sure if you are presenting with me or not, but feel free to pop in if you want. So I'm going to be talking about the Talent Identification Program of Kentucky, which is what we are calling TIP Kentucky. I'm going to open my chat here. If you all have questions as I'm going through this, feel free to put them in the chat so that I can stop in the appropriate places and address those. Because this is a brand new program for the state, and I know that there are going to be lots of questions. So I want to start with a little bit of history of the Center for Gifted Studies with Duke TIP. Many of you all might know that Duke TIP closed in December of 2020, and that was our talent identification program that we used in Kentucky. So Duke TIP's first cooperative program was the BAMPI program, which is a 3-week summer program that is hosted by the Center for Gifted Studies. And Western Kentucky University hosted the Kentucky Award ceremony for Duke TIP for every year that it was held, except for the first 2 years. And then, of course, the Center for Gifted Studies shared information with parents, educators, and students about the opportunities to participate in the talent identification program. So when we heard that Duke TIP had closed, we were very shocked, as I think a lot of people around the state and the nation were very shocked. So Julia reached out to Susan Asseline, who is at the Bell and Blank Center at the University of Iowa. They have been running their own talent search for several years, and we wanted their expertise in what we needed to be doing in order to fill this void that was left. And we began meeting with other people from centers at universities across the nation. We formed a consortium where we meet about once a month to talk about what we're doing in our centers and specifically looking at how we are filling the void from Duke TIP leaving. And we looked at what is involved in launching a talent search. So the overarching goal of TIP Kentucky is just recognizing and supporting talent. When I mentioned local norms, it's all about finding that talent in your school and TIP Kentucky is one way that we hope will help with finding those talented students. Benefits of participating in TIP Kentucky. You have access to above level testing, and this will be for 4th through 8th graders. And along with that, you don't just get a score. Sometimes you're just provided with that composite score, and it doesn't really tell you that much other than this is what the student scored. So what? So we are excited that there are going to be comprehensive reports that are sent along with that interprets the scores. And you'll also get a science score for those 4th through 6th graders who complete the above level testing that you may not have otherwise. And then we are going to continue the tradition of hosting an annual recognition ceremony. So you might be thinking to yourself, why above level testing? If you are just giving grade level tests to students, you might see that they're performing well, but you can't see exactly how much more they can do beyond grade level. And this above level testing removes that ceiling effect so that you can see they might be performing 3 or 4 grades higher than they actually are in right now. And without this above level testing, you're not able to assess that. So I'll start with talking about iExcel. That is going to be the assessment that is used for 4th through 6th graders. And it is an online test for 4th through 6th graders. And this is a platform provided through the Bell and Blank Center that they've been using for several years. It's licensed content developed by ACT. You all probably remember when ACT was administering the Explore assessment. So iExcel is licensed Explore content. So it is non-reference. And then it's also in 4 different content areas. It's science, reading, math, and English. So to set up iExcel testing, you do this in your district. You will work with us at the Center for Gifted Studies to select a date and set up testing using the online system. It can be done on Chromebooks, Mac, Windows. The only thing that they've had trouble with is doing it on iPads. So otherwise, they have had very good success with that. And then we will coordinate with the Bell and Blank Center to have someone there for technical support on the day of the testing. So if you have any trouble, you can ask them. They're also monitoring it while your students are taking the assessment so they can see if any problems are arising. And when you set up the testing date, then you get a registration link that you send out to students, and they can then go in and register. You can keep track of that in real time to see who's registered, who's not, and then send out reminders to make sure they're all registered. And then you also will receive a test manual for proctors. So you will have to come up with a proctor for the assessment. But the Bell and Blank Center provides a comprehensive proctoring report. And then students will receive a sample test so that they can become familiar with what the test looks like, and they can use it on the computer that they're going to be using the day of. That way they're not worried about the test itself or the format of the test itself or the technology on the day of. They're just worried about taking that assessment itself. And here's a sample question from English. So they give some text and they ask alternatives for the highlighted portion, and the student will select which one they think is the best alternative. And then when they get to the end of the section, if a student has not answered one of the questions, then it will say you didn't respond to question number 3, and it will prompt them to go back and review question number 3 before they move forward, just to make sure that they didn't miss answering one on accident. And as I mentioned, interpretation of the test results is very important to us. We want to make sure that educators and parents are provided with information about what the test score means, not just the test score. And this is being provided through what's called Ideal Solutions, and that is also developed through the Bell and Blank Center at the University of Iowa. So there will be individual student reports. It's going to give background information about participating in above level testing and what it means for highly capable students. It will give the student scale score, their national percentile compared to 8th graders, and the national percentile compared to the other students in his or her grade level. It gives interpretations of the scores in word and graphic form, and I will have a little image here in a minute on another slide that has the pyramid of service options. It lists the student's score in each subtest linked to specific content, and recommendations are tied to standards. It offers resources that families would find useful, and then also the pyramid of educational options is linked to the test scores. Now, the educator group report, this is what the educator will get for the group of students that they tested on that test date. It's a table of student scores, including the highest, lowest, and average score on each section. It gives the explanation of the performance of the group of students overall, talking about the strengths, weaknesses, and that's compared to 8th graders, independent of what grade the student was in when they took the test. And then you can sort scores to help you manage the data. It gives pictorial representations using the pyramid, and that's what's on the next slide that you'll be able to see. It gives lists of resources that might be useful for the students. And something to note, this group report is only available for the educators. It is not available to the parents. So this is what you might see for the pyramid of educational opportunities. It looks at, I know it's kind of small here, but it looks at your extremely academically talented students all the way down to your academically talented students in these rectangles. And then over here on the right, it talks about some of the service options that you might want to implement for your students in different subject areas. So the shapes triangle corresponds with math, science, and then English and reading. So for your extremely academically talented students, you might want to consider grade skipping, mentorships, dual enrollment, or any of the other ones they've listed here. And something we wanted to pull out just to highlight are the different types of acceleration. This comes from A Nation Empowered, where they outlined 20 different types of acceleration. And those were some of the service options that were mentioned in the pyramid diagram, but it was a little too small for you to see. So we just wanted to highlight that there's not just one form of acceleration that you might traditionally think of as grade skipping, but there are 20 forms that are mentioned in A Nation Empowered. Now, the ACT is what you might traditionally have thought about when you thought about TIP when they were looking at 7th graders. This part of the TIP Kentucky is a little bit still in flex because we are working with ACT to find out new policies and regulations that are in place for talent search students. So some of the information I'm sharing is very tentative and it may change as we move through the process, but we wanted to go ahead and share what we are thinking right now. And for the ACT component, instead of just doing 7th graders, we are opening it up to 7th and 8th graders. And what we believe the process will be, what we've heard so far, is that parents will register the students through TIP Kentucky, and then we will give them a voucher code that they then go to the ACT website and register for one of the national dates. And then they will put our, what they call scholarship data code in there so that the talent TIP Kentucky can receive their scores and we can get interpretations like we did for IXL and make sure that all of that data is going back to the students and the parents. Students will take the ACT at nearby testing centers, just like they would have when they were participating in Duke TIP, and they would receive detailed interpretation of the scores. Before I move on, are there any questions about what I've talked about so far? Now, I've covered a lot in a short amount of time. I don't see any right now. You can still put them in the chat, but I'm going to move on to the next slide and talk about other offerings that are available for students offered through the Center for Gifted Studies. Amanda, I see your question. I'll come back to it. Project Launch Plus is one of new opportunities that we have. We have a Javits grant that is in cooperation with Johns Hopkins University, and It involves talent search. It's for sixth graders, and they will come for 1 week during the summer and stay on our campus at WKU for Camp Discover. And then there's an online learning opportunity. It's either the 3 weeks before they're here on campus, or it will be the 3 weeks after they're here on campus. And then after they attend Camp Discover and the online virtual discovery is what we're calling it, they will participate in the above level assessment IExcel. And that is all paid for through the grant. The students that we're looking for Camp Discover are students that don't have opportunities to develop their talent otherwise. So we're looking for the students in the low income areas that their parents couldn't send them wherever they need it to be for additional opportunities. And we hope that you'll share information about that and be in touch with us if you have questions. We also have the Doctors Modi Make a Difference opportunity. It is a service learning opportunity that is made possible from doctors in Glasgow that have a real passion for service and giving back to their community. And they wanted to encourage that in gifted and talented students. So this is open to 7th through 12th graders throughout the state of Kentucky. There is a November 1st deadline. The first place will receive $1,500 to put forth towards either an existing service learning project that they are doing already or a new one that they are going to be doing. And the second place is $1,000 and the third place is $500. Julia, I saw you unmuted. Did you want to add something?
Yes, I do. If by any chance you have students who came to SCATS or VAMPI, there is a separate competition here that is open to giving $500 for Make a Difference grants that your students would have. But it is limited to those who come to SCATS or VAMPI. Actually this year or last year, but last year was pretty limited. So it's pretty much for this year. You can read about all of this on the center's website.
We also have the BERTA seminar coming up about social and emotional and responsive guidance, parenting, teaching, and counseling gifted students. And Dr. Christina Collins will be coming in for that on October 18th. It is face-to-face and there's no cost to attend. You can go to our website and register for that. We are also offering Super Saturdays face-to-face for 1st through 6th graders. Mary has stepped in to lead that, thank you. And it will be the first 3 Saturdays in November. You can register on our website. There is a list of a wide range of topics in the classes that will be covered. And then we want you to save the dates for summer 2022. We are planning for all of our programming to be in person. Julia, I hope all the dates are up to date here. If they're not, just let me know. And please share these dates with students in your district that you think would benefit from our programming. And something I didn't mention here, but I want to make sure that you all know, we don't ever want a financial barrier to be preventing students who really need to be at our programs from coming. So if you have students that really need to be at our programs, but they just can't come from a financial standpoint, we do have financial assistance available on a needs-based process. And if you have questions about that, you can feel free to reach out to us. And then that brings me to the end. I'm going to stop sharing. I saw a few questions in here. There's a question about the cost for IExcel, and I believe that cost that we've decided on is $49. Is that correct, Julia?
That is correct.
Cost per student is $49. There is a reduction if you have a student that qualifies for free and reduced lunch, though. I don't know that off the top of my head. Is it about half, Julia?
I think it's probably about half. And please note, this is something that parents may request and pay for, or it may be something you as a school want that additional information and pay for it. It certainly could be done either way.
And if a parent requests it and you're testing 3 or fewer students only, instead of doing it as a group test, then the cost is a little bit higher just because there's more work that goes into that. So keep that in mind. But if you're testing 4 or more, then it's the $49 cost.
And if it's the above level testing for a student in the Javits grant, then the cost is absorbed by the grant.
And then when we're looking at the ACT, the cost for that, it's going to be the cost of the ACT plus a small administrative fee so that we can provide those interpretive reports and get the students into the talent search. Leslie has asked about the grade levels. So students that are in grades 4 through 6 will be taking the iExcel assessment because iExcel is content developed at the 8th grade level. For it to be above level assessments, then it is for students in 4th through 6th grade. And then the 7th and 8th graders are going to be with the ACT. One of the problems that we're running into and why we're a little bit uncertain about everything, about some things, is ACT has changed some processes that they have. And we're no longer able to register students under the age of 13 at this time. They are working with us and our consortium to get that figured out, but it's taking a little bit longer on that. So that's why we don't have quite as concrete answers on the ACT component of it.
But they're coming.
Missy has asked, in the past, Duke TIP required an assessment score from state testing to participate. Will this be the same for Kentucky TIP? So I don't think we've taught that for them to take the ACT or iExcel. We are leaving that up to the discretion of the school to identify students that they think would benefit from taking the above level assessments to find out how they perform and get them into TIP Kentucky.
I agree with you, Tyler, and that would be true for parent choice as well.
Any other questions? That I think I've addressed everything that's in there right now. If you think of anything after the presentation, you're welcome to email me. We may not know it right off the top of our heads, but we will find out and get back to you.
Dr. Clark, I'm sorry, one more thing. So if the students are going to register for the ACT, do they register through ACT online, or are we supposed to have our parents register through WCU?
We do not have that developed yet, just because we're waiting to hear back from the ACT. What I presented was the tentative plan that we have, but we are still waiting to hear from ACT. We were hoping to hear last month, but that meeting did not happen. So we are hoping that we get more information at our next meeting, which is coming up in a week or so.
Leslie, if you were talking to a parent today, I would encourage the parent, if the child is 13 or above, to register through the regular channels of ACT. But we hope before too long that the other opportunity will be there. And we also are certainly wanting children under 13 to be able to participate. But at this moment, it's just not all worked out. But it's not because we haven't tried. But may I add that we need your help to get this information out about TIP Kentucky. People generally across Kentucky knew about Duke TIP. Since it's not there anymore, we need your help to disseminate that information, that these above level opportunities are available, and that we are looking to be the hub for that information. So thanks for helping us disseminate information. And we would be very happy to come talk to a parent group, a school group, to do that virtually or to come in person. All you would have to do is ask, and we could set a time and work out those arrangements.
And as you have questions that come up, either your own questions or questions that parents or other educators in your district are asking you, feel free to send them our way. We are just beginning this process, and we appreciate your patience as we develop a firm process, but we need your feedback to know what the questions are so that we're able to address them and what we have.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And if you could send me your presentation, I'll link it in our agenda. And that way.
I did that this morning, so it should
Oh,
be
I'm
up there.
sorry. Oh, great. Thank you so much. Wonderful. So now if Dr. Evans could begin to share with us. Thank you so much for pulling all of this together. You've provided a lot of valuable information to our network today. We appreciate it.
Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Great. Well, I have tried to come up with some ideas that you all as gifted coordinators can share with the teachers in your schools. I know that professional development is so very important, and it's also very hard to accomplish in the schools because of all of the other great needs there are for professional development. When I was a principal at Cumberland Trace, we tried to once a month or once every other month to have some quick little activity or tidbit of information about gifted students at a faculty meeting. So what I've put together are a series of slides that I hope that you can pull pieces from that to share at a faculty meeting or share individually with teachers. Now, some of this, you all are veterans, many of you, and you're going to look at this and go, well, I know that. Well, yes, you do. But from my experience with working with a cohort of teachers in a school district here in Kentucky, regular classroom teachers don't know a lot of this very basic information. Here's a quick little strategy that teachers seem to like and students seem to like. It's called Question That. So you can pick any word you want to when you're working with teachers, but a word that seemed apropos because of everything they're dealing with is overwhelmed. So you just say to the teachers, the answer to the question is overwhelmed. What is a possible question? And if you all want to jot a few questions in the chat of what question would have the answer of overwhelmed, we'll take just 15 seconds to do that. How are teachers and students feeling during the pandemic? Yes, the answer is overwhelmed. What's another question? What is a common trait of teachers this year? Yes, what's another question? How is everyone feeling right now? Absolutely. Okay, and one of the keys to this is, and as you're teaching this strategy to teachers and to students, is they can't repeat a question that someone else has had. And so you can see from that as more and more questions appear, it becomes harder and harder. You have to think more to come up with different questions. Well, did you know, and you all probably did, by the time students are in second grade, they ask half as many questions as they ask in kindergarten. You know, that's pretty startling to me. And I found a quote by Neil Postman that's in a favorite book of mine called A Whack on the Side of the Head. That book's by Roger Van Eck. And Neil Postman says, children enter school as question marks and leave as periods. Well, we certainly don't want that happening with our students, but they're not going to continue to ask questions unless we encourage them to ask questions. So when you're thinking about this strategy, question that. You want to start with something that's simple, that's easy, that's fun, that maybe doesn't take a whole lot of thinking, and then you move into more and more content. And you can ask students to apply targeted skills as they do this, and that's where the differentiation comes in. So for example, today's answer is Cinderella. Write a question in the chat. I'm not going to ask you all to do this, but if you were doing it with students, that applies to one of these skills. So what's a question that the answer is Cinderella? That might be an inference question or a cause and effect or a sequence. And as you look at those, you can think, well, a sequence question wouldn't be nearly as hard as a cause and effect question, which wouldn't be nearly as challenging as an inference question. Well, let me show you what these are some real questions that students came up with. So the answer is Cinderella. A sequencing question might be, which sister was the last to arrive at the ball? A cause and effect question, after going door to door, who did the prince decide wore the glass slipper? And here's a favorite one. This is Liam, and this might have even been Abby Lintz's son, I'm not sure. Who should have an insurance policy against broken glass? What a great inference question. And so you can really see the level of challenge through this. Oh, too fast there. You can use this in all subject areas. For instance, in mathematics, the answer is 24. You ask kids to apply their understanding of fractions. So what is half of 48? What is 2/3 of 36? So some things to consider with question that. It's very good to share this in small groups first, much less intimidating for students rather than having them share in front of the whole group. You can target skills for differentiation, and all students will be successful. And that's what regular classroom teachers are looking for. That what kinds of strategies can you share with me that I can use to challenge my high ability students, but that all students can participate in this. So what are some ways that you would use, a teacher could use this in their classroom? It could certainly be a bell ringer. It could be something that early finishers would work on. It could be an activity at a center, could be used to review for a test, could be an exit slip. It could be a pre-assessment. It's a very simple strategy that has big payoff. The teachers don't have to gather a lot of supplies, but it truly does encourage thinking. One of our teachers that I'm working with has a bulletin board in her classroom, and it's called Question That. And every few days or every week or so, she puts a new word up there, and then she has a bunch of Post-its beside it. And she encourages the students, when they're an early finisher or whatever, to go up and put a question to go with that word. And, as you can tell, as the week goes on, it becomes harder and harder. And also think of the learning that occurs as they're reading the questions that all of the other students have written. Here's a content level one. Good example in science. The answer is sedimentary rocks. Well, a very simple question from someone who maybe, just knows, I know it's a rock, so what is a kind of rock? But as you look at these questions, you can see maybe some of these students have a big storehouse of information, and some of these students may have done some research. So it also encourages students to do research. Bertie Kingor says, pre-assessment saves some students from frustration. It saves others from boredom. So as we go back and look at this, think about how this could be a pre-assessment. And, if I'm thinking of a strategy that I would want every teacher to be utilizing, I would say it would be pre-assessment, because that has to come first as you're planning for differentiation. So as you're looking at these questions, and the teacher encouraged kids to put their name on the Post-it, so then she can see, well, which student knows that this is a kind of rock where you often find fossils? So even something as simple as this can be used for pre-assessment. I'm going to talk a little bit about pre-assessment now, because even though you and I are sold on it, not everyone is. I see that more and more every place I go. So some basic tenets of pre-assessment. Pre-assessment is critical for appropriate challenge. Remember, a child cannot learn what she already knows. So how do you find out what they already know? Pre-assessment. Pre-assessment is the linchpin of differentiation. You can't really have it without pre-assessment. Pre-assessment identifies ahead of the next unit what students know, understand, and are able to do. And pre-assessment helps find gaps, clear up misconceptions, and see who has already mastered the material and who needs scaffolding. And I think as teachers would look at these, they would say, well, yes, that I want that. That's something that all teachers want. The curriculum compacting study, and this has been around for a while, from the National Research Center on the Gifted and Talented, there was a study and it revealed that 60% of the gifted students in this study were able to achieve 80% mastery of the grade level content before school had even begun. And I think teachers need to know about this study and to know this, even though this was several years ago. I'm afraid it's still true today that we're asking kids who already know 80% of the material to sit in classes and hear it again and do it again. And that's where the boredom comes in, and the frustration, and they tune out, and underachievement can occur. So when we pre-assess, we usually think of pre-assessment in 3 areas: readiness, learning profile, and interests. And when we think of readiness, we usually think of academic readiness, that what is the degree of prior knowledge? What are the concepts, the content knowledge that kids already have? We think of the learning profile. What's their preferred way of learning? What's their preferred way of gathering information? What's their preferred way of showing what they know? And then we also like to know what kids' interests are. What are their interests within this subject area, this unit we're getting ready to teach, but then also what are they interested in general? And there's lots of surveys and interviews, or just talking with kids helps us find that out. So in pre-assessment, one of the strategies, that's one of the most common ones, is something called the TWH. You may have heard it called KWL. There's lots of different ones, but the one we like to share is the think. What do you think about this topic? What do you want to know about this topic? And then what do you want to learn? Or how do you want to learn about this topic? Now, this is an example of one that a son of a colleague of ours did when he was in the 5th grade. And that's, typically when you learn about the Civil War. And as you look through this, what is he thinking about the Civil War? If you look on down there, it becomes obvious that he has done quite a bit of reading about the Civil War. When you look at the clothing, he's talking about boots, coats, and kepis. Well, I didn't know what the kepis were, but that's the hat, the gray hat with the leather on it that the Southern soldiers wore. As you look at weapons, he knows quite a bit about those too. He knows what a cavalry carbine is, which I didn't know about that either. And then what does he want to know about the Civil War? Not surprisingly, he wants to know more about the weaponry. He wants to know about, some of the everyday things. And then how does he want to learn about it? He wants active things. He wants to reenact, he wants projects, he wants field trips, but he'll also read some books too. So as you think about this TWH, it really taps into the readiness, the academic readiness. You get a feel that this is a student who already has quite a bit of prior knowledge about the Civil War. It also taps into learning profile. He's a kid who wants hands-on, active kinds of things. And then it certainly tells you what his interests are. So it's a pre-assessment in all 3 of those areas. What are some other pre-assessment strategies? I think many times our teachers think, oh, it's just a paper pencil, test, multiple choice test kind of thing. But there's, the TWH chart is one of them, but there's many others. Give the end of unit assessment at the beginning of the unit. And I think kind of a rule of thumb is if a student already knows 80% of the information, then you teach them that other 20% as it comes up, and then let them have an alternative project, an independent study or of some sort. This young man could be planning the Civil War reenactment activity. Open-ended questions is another good way to pre-assess. You can just ask kids to say, to write or to talk about, what do you know about the Civil War, or what do you know about the rainforest, or whatever your topic is. Another one that's fairly easy to do is pick out what are the 5 most difficult questions that you would hope students would know by the end of that unit, but you ask them at the beginning of the unit. And of course, if students can answer those, they don't need to go lockstep through that unit. And then I want to share with you some graphic organizers. I think many students are visual learners, and graphic organizers are a good way to tap into their learning. And I think teachers enjoy doing graphic organizers. And most of these are very, very simple. I think we're all familiar with webs. And one way to pre-assess using a web is just whatever your topic is, in this case, amphibians, put that in the middle, and then just let the kids free write in the other circles. But I like to direct it a little bit more, and so make it more of a topic web, so that I'm trying to, these are the things that I'm going to teach in my unit. I'm going to teach characteristics of amphibians, the life cycle, names of different amphibians, what their habitat is. So then this directs kids to be a little bit more focused in their thinking, and it gives the teacher more information. Walkabout charts. This is maybe one that teachers are not quite as familiar with. A walkabout chart is more of a more engaging, more active way to gather pre-assessment in the classroom. So what you do is you give each student one of these charts, and you have them walk around and ask the other students in the classroom if they can answer any of these questions. And so if they find someone that can list things that a plant needs to grow, then the student with the chart writes the answer down, so it helps their learning, but then it's initialed by the person who gave them the answer. So you do this, kids get their charts filled out, then you come back and you have a discussion, and the teacher then collects the charts. And from looking at those charts, the teacher's going to see whose initials are on every question, and they'll be able to tell who are my experts in this topic, who are my students who are ready for more challenging information on this topic. Another one that many teachers aren't familiar with is the Frayer Diagram. This was a middle school class, and they were talking about independence. And so they asked students to do a definition of independence, to do an illustration. What does independence look like? What are some examples of independence, and what are some non-examples of independence? And so students that can complete something like this, that's going to give you some information about what is their understanding of independence. So what do students need to know before taking a pre-assessment? Teachers need to understand that this may produce a little anxiousness among students, because students are used to taking a test at the end of the unit. And so when you ask them to pre-assess before a unit, sometimes students are a little nervous about that. But you tell students no one expects them to know all of the answers or information, and explain to them what the purpose of the pre-assessment is, that it gives them an opportunity to show what they know and what their interests are, and what their preferred ways of knowing are. But many of these, such as the graphic organizers I shared, students won't even think of that as a test. It's a more fun way to gather that information. We want teachers to know that pre-assessment should guide their instruction and learning. And then once they pre-assess, to use that pre-assessment. That seems very basic, but I have to tell you that sometimes pre-assessment data, it's just checking off the box. I pre-assessed, but then I'm going to go ahead and teach the way I always have. And of course, that's not what we're after. I have one more quick strategy to share with you that you can share with your teachers. This one's been around for a long time. It's called PMI. It was developed by Dr. Edward de Bono, the Thinking Hats guy. And the purpose of it is to help kids learn to look at an idea from more than one perspective. So this is great for encouraging critical thinking. You can have a chart. Here's a very simple PMI chart. I've seen some that for the plus, they have an arrow that kids could write in, and for the minus, they have an arrow going down. And so there's different ones, but I tend to stick with the simplest one. And what you do, let me go back to this. What you do, the plus is you give kids a topic, something a bit controversial. What are all the pluses, the positives about that? And then a minus. What would be the negatives? What would be the problems with this? And then what's interesting about this? You know, it's not necessarily a positive or a negative, but what's just something that goes along with this that's interesting? So you divide kids into groups, and this is one group's going to come up with the pluses, one's going to come up with the minuses, and one's going to just focus on what's interesting. So if we were going to do this as teachers, there's been an ongoing debate for over 30 years regarding the value of memorizing math facts. So what are the pluses? Why should we have kids memorize math facts? What are the issues with that? You know, there's many folks out there that would say that's not what we want kids to be spending their time doing. I'm sure Jamie would weigh in on this one. And then what's interesting about this whole issue and this whole debate? So there's your three groups there. And then I don't think we really have time for this, but I had put a Padlet together for this virtual professional development where you would have the three charts and have, I was going to have you all do it, but I don't think there's time for that. So if you were going to do PMI in your classroom, here's some topics I thought of, but I'm sure you could think of some other topics that might be more relevant with the students that you work with. Should students be paid for going to school? Should school lunches follow nutritional guidelines, or should kids be able to have whatever kind of sugary snacks they want? Should elementary students have cell phones? And you know, what other interesting topics that you could come up with for kids to work with? And then at the end of a PD, I put teachers in groups and I'd say, compliment the other two people in your group for the great job they're doing with kids, and then share one strategy you've found that works with high ability kids. So I hope that, I'll stop sharing here. I hope that this little PowerPoint I put together, that there'll be one or two things in there that you might find helpful to share with the teachers that you work with.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Well, Mary, I really did want to do that work, but I looked at the time because I really do have a lot to think about that. You really gave me a prompt that I wanted to write about. So
we'll do that another time.
We'll have to do that for fun sometime. We're just that crazy kind of people.
That's right.
Well, so many things that could be shared immediately with our folks. We had planned, when you look at our agenda, we had planned to go to a breakout and then come back from that. But with time, and I know you're busy, we want to be sure and let you be able to leave by 10:30. So let's just share out. Let's just share out a whole group, and then we'll have time to do your exit slip within your 10:30 time. Would someone like to mic on and react to what you've heard today from any of our presenters, or the conversations that occurred, or questions maybe that stirred something inside you? And we would invite you to mic on. You're welcome to write in the chat, but we'd love to hear your voice.
I just thought everything was so wonderful. I can't believe it's over so quickly. I looked down and I was like, oh my gosh, the time. And thank you for recording this, because I got kicked out. So I'm going to have to go back and watch that last session, but the last few minutes were amazing. So thank you.
Could I maybe ask a different question of the group, Jamie?
Absolutely.
What are things that you are thinking about, or questions that you have that you want to make sure are covered in either future meetings like this, or special meetings that we host through the center, or just what do you need?
Hi, Tyler. I would just say more of things like this. I really appreciate the strategies that I can pass along to the teachers. I work as a coach and a GT coordinator. So for me, trying to help teachers to differentiate in their classrooms it's twofold for me. I want all the kids to have differentiated instruction, but I especially want our GT kids to have that in the classroom. So super helpful. And I don't have a GT certificate. So my background is not in gifted education. So those kinds of strategies and things help me. Also, as the coordinator, then I supervise the GT teacher. And so it would be super helpful for me to see what is it that I'm looking at when I evaluate her that separates her from other teachers. And I want to make sure that I'm giving her the feedback that she needs so that our kids can have the best instruction. We got a great GT teacher. She's fabulous, but I want to make sure that I'm doing right by her too. So those kinds of things are helpful for me.
And your response kind of prompts me to announce that if you know of someone who needs to complete the gifted endorsement this year, it usually starts at WKU in the fall, but I'll be teaching a winter class that would allow someone to complete the endorsement yet this academic year. So that's just information that you could share if you hear of someone who is wanting to start the endorsement and for some reason didn't get it going in the fall.
I would like to jump in and respond to the question, how do we get teachers to stop making students do the work they miss when meeting with GT? You know, that's one of the myths, that kids are going to have gaps if they don't do every little bit of work. And of course, you know, pre-assessment, if they would just pre-assess, they might find out that that's not necessary. But I really think this is where your administrator has to step in. You know, they just have to say to teachers, this is not appropriate. But of course, that means that the administrator has to understand and be educated. But you know, when you are talking with your colleagues and it's not convincing them, then I think you have to talk to the administrator, and hopefully they will be supportive and back you on this.
And just one thing to piggyback on what Mary said, that's really true. You know, this is where your policies and procedures could be helpful. If you had some sort of a policy about this, I know Bullitt County has a policy about work and missing classwork and that kind of thing. And
really, it could be an equity thing. I mean, equal is not equitable, you know, so when you're providing for the needs, that's a part of equity there. So I agree with you. I think policy could be helpful. Well, we're coming up on our 10:30 minutes. So we want to say thank you so much to each of our presenters and to you, the network, for listening so intently and responding and sharing in chat. We know we have some things in chat you suggested to us. We'll take a good look at that. And we ask you to click on that exit sheet and give us feedback. We will pour over that, we promise, and we'll meet together and we'll look at that and before we make decisions about next meeting. So when we look at our next meeting time, let me pull that date up it's on your agenda. Oh, it's not. I'm sorry, it's not on the agenda. So it's in January, and I don't have that date in front of me. I apologize for that. I thought I'd placed it on the agenda. But, oh well. The best plans sometimes just don't work out, do they? So I think Julia's going to find that down in January for us.
You're on mute, Julia.
January the 27th.
Thank you so much, Julia. Yes, 27th. So please click on there, give us feedback. We hope you have a restful fall break and you have an opportunity to catch your breath and get outside and enjoy this beautiful weather somehow. And thank you. We know you have a busy day and we'll sign off now. Thank you so much.